The Belizean Prayer. Almighty and eternal God, who through Jesus Christ has revealed your glory to all nations, please protect and preserve Belize, our beloved country. God of might, wisdom, and justice, please assist our Belizean government and people with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude. Let the light of your divine wisdom direct their plans and endeavors, so that with your help we may attain our just objectives. With your guidance, may all our endeavors tend to peace, social justice, liberty, national happiness, the increase of industry, sobriety, and useful knowledge. We pray, O God of mercy, for all of us, that we may be blessed in the knowledge and sanctified in the observance of your most holy law, that we may be preserved in union and in that peace which the world itself cannot give. And after enjoying the blessings of this life, please admit us, dear Lord, to that eternal reward that you have prepared for those who love you. Amen.
Announcement by the President.
Good morning. On September 10th and 21st this month, we will commemorate the 223rd anniversary of the Battle of St. George's Key and the 40th anniversary of our independence under the theme Belize at 40, Hopeful Hearts, Steady Hands, Together We Rise. This was coined by Alexandra Villanueva and Akeem Cooper alongside Victoria Gonzalez, who did the logo. Today, I wish to acknowledge our predecessors of this honorable house who on September 1st, 1981, approved the national symbols and national seal resolutions and resolutions to join the Commonwealth of Nations, the membership of the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Non-Aligned Movement, and our relationship with the European community, all of whom we continue to share mutually beneficial partnerships. It was also on that day, September 1st, 1981, that this honorable house passed the Belize Constitutional Bill 1981. So for this, on our 40th year of independence, I wish to recognize first the father of our nation, our national hero, the Right Honorable George Price, who led our country on this journey. Second, I wish to recognize the members of the task force who drafted our Constitution, the lead, the Honorable B.H. Courtney, and members, Honorable Asad Schuman, Honorable Said Musa, and Honorable C.L.B. Rogers. Finally, and as important, I wish to recognize those honorable members of the Senate who, with hope in their hearts for a better future for Belize, set us on a path of self-determination, a path to assert our sovereignty, and a path to take our rightful place among the independent nations of the world. These honorable members were the President of the Senate, the Honorable Mr. W.E. Coffin, the Vice President of the Senate, the Honorable G. Ramos, Senator, the Honorable C.L.B. Rogers, Minister of Home Affairs, Senator, the Honorable Mr. A. Fuller, Senator, the Honorable H. Lewis, Senator, the Honorable M. Esquivel, Senator, the Honorable A. Aragon, and Senator, the Honorable E. Searle. Let us remember their noble decision on that particular day. Happy September celebrations, Belize. Honorable members, by letter dated 3rd September 2021, Cabinet's recommendation has been signified to the following. 1. The Companies Amendment Bill 2021. 2. Stamp Duties Amendment Bill 2021. 3. Stamp Duties Amendment Number 2 Bill 2021. 4. Electronic Transfer of Funds Crimes Bill 2021. 5. Tax Administration and Procedure Amendment Bill 2021. 6. Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill 2021. 7. Resolution authorizing the transfer of carbon rights and credits to the Belize Maya Forest Trust Motion 2021. And 8. Resolution authorizing the transfer of carbon rights and credits to the Maya Forest Corridor Trust Motion 2021.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives. The swearing of another member, but the council, but the council we got to.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, allow me, with your permission, to, on behalf of this side of the Honorable Senate, associate ourselves with the eloquent words spoken by you earlier this morning on the occasion of our 40th anniversary of our independence. Madam President, I rise to take charge of the following bills: Companies Amendment Bill 2021, Stamp Duties Amendment Bill 2021, Stamp Duties Amendment Number 2 Bill 2021, Tax Administration and Procedure Amendment Bill 2021, Electronic Transfer of Funds Crimes Bill 2021, Electronic Transactions Bill 2021, Electronic Evidence Bill 2021, Data Protection Bill 2021, Public Sector Data Sharing Bill 2021, Immigration Amendment Bill 2021, Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill 2021, and Court of Appeal Amendment Number 3 Bill 2021. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order Number 49-1, I move that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith.
Honorable members, the question is that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Papers.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to lay on the table sessional papers 11/1/14, the Social Security Board Actuarial Valuation of the Social Security Scheme as at 31st December 2020, 12/1/14, Social Security Board Financial Statements for the years ended December 31st, 2020 and 2019, and Independent Auditor's Report, and Sessional Paper 13/1/14, Civil Works Contract Agreements for Halover Bridge Replacement Project.
Honorable members, those papers are ordered to lie on the table.
Motion relating to the business or the sitting of the Senate.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President.
Honorable members, the question is that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Public business, government business, motions.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that whereas the agreement between the Government of Belize and the Government of Hungary on the mutual visa exemption for holders of diplomatic, service, and official passports, hereinafter referred to as the agreement, was signed on the 28th May 2021 in Mexico City. And whereas the objective of the agreement is to permit nationals of Belize and Hungary who hold valid diplomatic service or official passports to enter, exit, and transit through the territory of the other party without a visa requirement and stay there for a period not exceeding 90 days in any 180-day period. And whereas the government of Belize is desirous of ratifying the agreement pursuant to Article 16 of the agreement, and whereas Section 61A(2)(a) of the Belize Constitution, as amended by the Belize Constitution and Sixth Amendment Act Number 13 of 2008, provides that the Senate shall authorize the ratification of any treaty by the government of Belize. Now therefore be it resolved that the Senate authorizes the government of Belize to ratify the agreement between the government of Belize and the government of Hungary on the mutual visa exemption for holders of diplomatic service and official passports, a full text of which is hereto annexed.
Members, that motion is referred to the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee for examination, consideration, and report. I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, with your permission, we would like to take the next two motions together.
Proceed.
Much obliged. Madam President, I move that whereas Section 22 of the Finance and Audit Reform Act, Chapter 15 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, requires that the government shall, before disposing of any public asset with an aggregate value of or above $2 million, obtain the approval of the National Assembly to be signified by a resolution made in that behalf and published in the Gazette. And whereas by an agreement made on the 19th day of October 2020, the original agreement between the government of Belize and the Nature Conservancy, the parties agreed to cooperate in promoting the long-term protection and conservation of the natural resources of Belize, and in particular, the natural ecosystems, including flora, fauna, forests, and wildlife therein. And whereas to that end, the government of Belize have agreed to cooperate in the implementation of a strategy and mutual undertaking of the parties, whereby TNC will finance the acquisition of certain lands called the conservation lands in Belize to be held upon trust by the Belize Maya Forest Trust, the trustee, a not-for-profit company for the benefit of the government and people of Belize for the protection and conservation of their natural ecosystems, flora, fauna, and wildlife in perpetuity. And the government undertook to grant TNC through the trustee certain stamp duty and land tax exemptions for a period of 50 years, licenses and all carbon rights and credits associated therewith, and proceeds of sale in respect thereof regarding the said lands to be held in trust by the trustee for the sole use and benefit of the conservation, protection, and maintenance of the conservation lands. And whereas by virtue of an agreement supplemental to the original agreement made between the government and the TNC dated 31st day of August 2021, the TNC has agreed, among other things, that the land taxes shall apply to the conservation lands and that certain acquisition costs, endowment costs, and management costs are reimbursed. The government shall have the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of such excess or surplus amount of proceeds of sale of the carbon rights and credits associated therewith. And whereas by virtue of the Constitution of Belize, carbon rights and credits associated therewith are vested in the government of Belize and therefore constitute public assets, and whereas the carbon rights and credits associated therewith in connection with the conservation lands, which the government agreed to transfer to the trustee pursuant to the original agreement, as amended by the supplemental agreement, has an aggregate value in excess of $2 million. Now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable House approves the government of Belize to transfer to the Belize Maya Forest Trust the carbon rights and credits associated therewith in connection with the conservation lands for the sole use and benefit of the conservation, protection, and maintenance of the conservation lands, provided that certain acquisition costs, endowment costs, and management costs are reimbursed in accordance with the terms of the original agreement as amended by the supplemental agreement. The government shall have the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of such excess or surplus amount of proceeds of sale of the carbon rights and credits associated therewith. And in very similar vein, Madam President, I move that whereas Section 22 of the Finance and Audit Reform Act, Chapter 15 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, requires that the government shall, before disposing of any public asset with an aggregate value of more than of or above $2 million, obtain the approval of the National Assembly to be signified by a resolution made in that behalf and published in the Gazette. And whereas by an agreement made on the 19th day of October 2020 between the Government of Belize and Global Wildlife Conservation, now called RE-WILD, the principal agreement, the parties agreed to cooperate in promoting the long-term protection and conservation of the natural resources of Belize, and in particular, its natural ecosystems, including flora, fauna, forests, and wildlife therein. And whereas, to that end, the government and Global Wildlife Conservation have agreed to cooperate in the implementation of a strategy and mutual undertaking of the parties, whereby RE-WILD will finance the acquisition of certain lands, called the conservation lands in Belize, to be held upon trust by the Maya Forest Corridor Trust, the trustee, a not-for-profit company for the benefit of the government and people of Belize for the protection and conservation of their natural ecosystems, flora, fauna, and wildlife in perpetuity. And the government undertook to grant RE-WILD through the trustee certain stamp duty and land tax exemptions for a period of 50 years, licenses, and all carbon rights and credits associated therewith, and proceeds of sale in respect thereof regarding the said lands, to be held in trust by the trustee for the sole use and benefit of the conservation, protection, and maintenance of the conservation lands. And whereas by virtue of an agreement supplemental to the principal agreement made between the government and RE-WILD, dated the 31st day of August 2021, RE-WILD has agreed, among other things, that land taxes shall apply to the conservation lands, and that certain acquisition costs, endowment costs, and management costs are reimbursed. The government shall have the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of such excess or surplus amount of proceeds of sale of the carbon rights and credits associated therewith. And whereas by virtue of the Constitution of Belize, carbon rights and credits associated therewith are vested in the government of Belize and therefore constitute public assets. And whereas the carbon rights and credits associated therewith in connection with the conservation lands, which the government agreed to transfer to the trustee pursuant to the principal agreement as amended by the supplemental agreement, has an aggregate value in excess of $2 million. Now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable House approves the government of Belize to transfer to the Maya Forest Corridor Trust the carbon rights and credits associated therewith in connection with the conservation lands for the sole use and benefit of the conservation, protection, and maintenance of the conservation lands, provided that after certain acquisition costs, endowment costs, and management costs are reimbursed in accordance with the terms of the principal agreement as amended by the supplemental agreement, the government shall have the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of such excess or surplus amount of proceeds of sale of the carbon rights and credits associated therewith. Madam President, members of the Senate will recall that earlier this year I was highly critical of the giveaway of the carbon rights and the tax benefits that were given away by the previous administration in an agreement that we came across. That relates to the original or the first motion that I just read. I was not aware at the time of the second agreement, otherwise I would have been just as critical. It has been now renegotiated and a supplemental agreement has been signed by the government of Belize, in which, as the motion indicates, we have insisted that land tax be applied and paid, and that the carbon rights are for the government of Belize, and of course the government of Belize will have the benefit of any monies in excess after certain costs are reimbursed.
I recognize Senator Michael Perry.
Thank you, Madam President. Feels like it's been a while, Madam President. I haven't seen you in a long time. It's like a long time.
We were on recess.
Yes. The news of my demise were greatly exaggerated, I think, too, Madam President. Madam President, let me join the leader of government business in joining you regarding your comments and certainly the legendary personalities associated with our independence, and we look forward to celebrating our 40th birthday, September 21st. But unlike Senator Courtney, I will not pretend as if though the 10th of September no exists. I also join you in your pronouncements for the 223rd anniversary of the Battle of St. George's Key coming up on September 10th. We can't forget the 10th. It's a pity we can't jump up. Well, even if I don't know COVID, I can't jump up no more, Madam President, but that is a time for us to celebrate our history and a rich history as that. So I join you in making sure that the 10th of September is not forgotten and is entrenched very much in our memory. Madam President, in Belize they say, you know, one of the most difficult things to do that eat your vomit. It's not a pleasant thing to do, but it is very magnanimous of the PUP, and especially Senator Courtney, to be willing to eat his vomit for the benefit of the country. He did recall, I mean, who can forget? The pronouncements were wild and passionate. He was busting something and revealing some great act of treason by the UDP when he found this TNC agreement that gives essentially value to the country for conservation. He hailed it or defiled it as the worst thing that you could imagine a country could do, and all the giveaways and all the things that Minister Pat at the time was going to do, and all the things he waived and all the things he was giving away, only for us to find out when we found the deal and looked at it, or I found it and I looked at it, I should say, Minister Pat clearly had no authority to waive taxes, and the things goes beyond the 2 million, just like what we're doing here today, you know. So, Senator, I think you need to take one more magnanimous step. And I think you need to apologize to your colleague for the very rough things you said when this matter came up with the same TNC deal. Same thing you are using now, and clearly shows from what we're hearing the Prime Minister saying about debt restructuring, that these things have value. Conservation has value. And while it is not yet a done deal, I don't want to go into the technicalities of it. I think, Senator Cowie, we're about 50% there. We need the 75% threshold, and the Venezuela vote is, of course, very important. But it goes to show, Madam President, that what we were doing, the agreement that we signed in October, because government doesn't stop when there's an election on the horizon. Government doesn't stop when the parliament is dissolved. That's why the Constitution provides for the executive to continue if the National Assembly is dissolved. Because the work continues and things like these need to be entered into. Now, if you are telling us as the PUP that you're taking something that we started, because it started with UDP, you know. If you're taking something that we started and you feel like you need to fine-tune it, touch it up a little bit, make it even better, man, kudos to you, man. Congratulations to you if you're able to do that. But don't come to this National Assembly, blast your colleague, blast an agreement that we entered into, only to have you come back a couple months later and come to this National Assembly like it is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You have to be consistent and you have to be measured in your criticisms of what the past government did without truly examining the circumstances surrounding what we did. Clearly, Minister Courtney, Madam President, had no knowledge of the value that conservation would pay in the debt restructuring. Clearly, because he wouldn't have blasted this arrangement that the UDP entered into in October of 2020. So I hope he acknowledges that. And to go one step further, not only are they embracing the TNC agreement, they're also embracing another one. So we have two. So not only is the PUP taking back their words concerning the TNC arrangement, they're doing more. They're doing more. Which goes to show, Madam President, that a lot of what they do in the National Assembly is just grandstanding, because they know that many of the things that we did when we were in government were of extremely high value. And you know, you're saying you open school now, and then you open building now. Man, the UDP building thing, you know. And nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with you smile up the minister, they cut ribbon and everything for UDP, for what UDP did. But at least show some respect and some appreciation for what we did when we were in government. And stop bashing things and then coming back and having to use the very same thing to help you out of a crisis or a situation that we may have. So you look like the PUP into environment now. Man, the PUP love environment now. Pushing environment. And I hope when you're doing this, because we have other things related to the environment, you know, Madam President, I'm being told that ministers and CEOs are being forced to accept NEAC proposals for some Waterloo project, some Portico project, we don't know. Environment is what benefits us to a large extent. And we need to be aware of that. However, Madam President, Minister Courtney maintains that we were giving away the farm for conservation. But here we are in the National Assembly looking at a bill for which we don't know how much we're doing, you know. The Finance and Audit Reform Act says we have to come here for anything over $2 million. But we can't know the exact figure of what we're relinquishing in exchange for these lands to be put in conservation. Because if you look, Madam President, at both the motions, and by virtue of an agreement supplemental to the original agreement made between the government and TNC dated the 31st of August 2021, TNC has agreed, among other things, that land taxes shall apply to the conservation lands, and that after certain acquisition costs, endowment costs, and management costs are reimbursed. What is the value of that? What is the value of that? What is the dollar figure? Do we have an idea of what those reimbursement costs, management costs, and acquisition costs will be? Clearly, you're admitting that it will be more than $2 million. But if it is much more, and if it is significant, then what you're doing is not that much different of a deal that we entered into in October of 2020. The devil is always in the details, Madam President. How much are we giving up? How much are we relinquishing? What are these exact costs? Don't misunderstand me, Madam President. This is a program and an initiative started by the UDP. It is being continued by the PUP, which is fine. It's what you're supposed to do. You continue good policy and good direction, man. Proud of you. But Let not the government come here and pretend like they're coming up with something new, something ingenious, something that nobody thought of before, especially if the cost cannot really be determined at this point, and that the cost may even be the same as contemplated by the UDP in October 2020. So, let me say, we applaud the effort. You're fine-tuning what we did. We support that. However, it is important that we point out, once again, the hypocrisy of the PUP. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Usmani Salas.
Thank you, Madam President, and I join you in wishing all Belizeans a happy September celebrations. On the two motions at hand, I was happy to hear my colleague who spoke before me sounds like an environmentalist man, quite the convert. Sounds good. I congratulate you. Keep it up. But he also spoke about giving up. I want to flip that on its head. And I want to get into the motion a little bit so the Belizean public understands what the importance of these two motions. It's not about giving up, it's about what we should give, not what may be given up. And I hope I can explain what I mean by that. So I rise, Madam President, to support these two motions because of how much is at stake. But at the same time, Madam President, it is important that I state some things for the record. It's very important that I do so, hoping that government considers the serious issues, concerns that I will raise, and see the wisdom in strengthening its partnership with its conservation NGOs and partners. Because there's so much more that we can do with a strong partnership. So first of all, the good news with the two motions at hand. The good news is that the government will transfer to the Belize Maya Forest Trust and the Maya Forest Corridor Trust, as the motion states, the carbon rights and credits associated therewith in connection with the conservation lands for the sole use and benefit of the conservation, protection, and maintenance of the conservation lands. These are huge areas that we have in northwestern Belize. So we must agree that this is terrific news. And I congratulate the government for taking that bold step and for the previous administration for having worked on it initially. But I need to talk a little bit about why this is not going far enough. I am sure, I don't have to say, I am sure that government understands that financing the management of conservation lands such as those is no easy feat. It's no easy feat. We're talking about millions of dollars a year needed to manage such lands, in this case, the conservation trust properties. So, since I come from some of that experience, I know that it will be all hands on deck among the NGO partners to ensure that year to year, they have sufficient funding, not only from the sale of proceeds of carbon credits, but from multiple sources, many of those from outside of Belize, to secure the conservation, protection, and maintenance of the lands that are entrusted to them as far as its management and administration, should create jobs and should help with engage with surrounding communities. So, just as a case in point, Program for Belize, that has been managing our largest private protected area in the country, probably the second largest in the nation, from, if I am not mistaken, 1988, they, on average, need to raise about $3 million a year to manage that property, on average. It used to be more than that. COVID put a packing on everything, and like everybody else, suffering, they had to cut corners, etc., but it is not the optimum that they need. Let's look at FCD, Friends for Conservation and Development, who manage the Chiquibo National Park, another protected area that is on our border. These are important areas because the employees of these organizations, along with our brave military, are at the front lines of this kind of work. If it were not for them, we would not know everything that is happening in those remote areas that every Belizean should be aware of, should take note of, because they need serious attention. FCD, I understand, because NGOs have learned how to stretch the dollar, needs about $1 million a year to manage at a basic level the Chiquibul National Park. And that's not even including the other part of the Chiquibul, which is the forest reserve. So if we take those figures for comparison, the Belize Maya Forest lands, the Maya Forest Corridor lands will need around the same per year after they have reimbursed a portion of the acquisition costs, capitalize their endowment, etc. They will need between $1 million to $2 million a year if we use the others as a comparison. So if we include all the other protected areas that NGOs are co-managing, we should be talking, we should understand how much fundraising is happening year to year. It's a lot of money. So one would therefore imagine that government would do all in its power to be a full partner at the table to facilitate the NGOs to close the financing gap, not to broaden the financing gap for the management of these areas. So there are two key aspects of the motion that gave me pause, Madam President. The first one is that after certain acquisitions, capitalizing the endowment are reimbursed in accordance with the agreements referred to in the motion and the supplemental agreement, the government shall have the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of the sale of proceeds of carbon rights and credits associated with all of that. So the point that I need to make is that after acquisition costs, endowment, and all of these things have been reimbursed, that's not the end there. The organizations will still be burdened with securing financing to cover the management costs of these areas. And I tried to give an idea how much some of the other organizations have to raise year to year. So I would not be surprised if it was a hard pill to swallow for the NGO partners to accept that government would have the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of those sales from the sale of carbon credits, rather than secure and preserve what could have been a fair revenue sharing arrangement for the life of the agreement or in perpetuity. That would be a true partnership, Madam President. Now, the second thing that gave me pause is that both motions state that the conservation partners agreed, among other things, that, and I quote from the motion, that land taxes shall apply to the conservation lands. Land taxes shall apply to the conservation lands. This one really stunned me, Madam President. And I could imagine that that was another very hard pill to swallow among the conservation partners. Now, let's just think about it. For land taxes to apply on lands that are held in trust for the government and people of Belize, it should really perplex the mind. That is as if government is charging land taxes to itself for land that it owns. It's true. The conservation lands in question are not public lands per se, but they are not private lands either. They are held in trust for the government and people of Belize. So in my opinion, Madam President, charging land taxes on such conservation trust properties sets a bad precedent. So on top of the millions of dollars that these partners have to raise on an annual basis, now they have to raise so much more to pay land taxes year to year. I worry if this thing is applied to all conservation trust properties. I really hope that I believe it's the fourth schedule of the Land Tax Act, that I really hope that that is not amended to include all conservation trust properties, because then I really have to worry how organizations like Program for Belize that manage conservation trust properties, TIDE that manages conservation trust properties, Corzal Sustainable Future Initiative that manage conservation trust properties, they will be in a whole heap of trouble if they need to be raising money to pay land taxes on top of what they already have to fundraise. We should be talking about closing the financing gap, not expanding the financing gap. So I believe that the view of this government administration that collecting land taxes from the conservation lands and for the government to access a portion of the proceeds from the sale of carbon credits, for which the government will be the sole decision maker, is somehow a win for Belize and Belizeans, I think is taking a step backward. I'm sure we will all agree that Belize has a world-renowned track record for being a conservation leader. We must agree also that conservation NGOs partners manage conservation land areas based on transparent missions and management plans. So to make it sound as if NGOs must also pay and contribute to general revenue funds as if they do not already significantly contribute to our sustainable development, I have to say, Madam President, is a distortion of reality. And I want to share this. We know that NGOs, in fact, contribute to nation building and sustainable human development in ways and for purposes transparent for the public. We, among the Belize network of NGOs, we recently did a survey, still a live survey. We want as many of our NGOs to complete the survey to try and get a sense of how much NGOs are contributing to the economy of this country, to sustainable human development. So based on partial results, just 25 NGOs that have completed the survey, those alone have invested close to $100 million over the last 5 years in sustainable human development. And I'm not only talking, conservation, I'm talking the gamut of sustainable human development. So, talking about closing the financing gap, I must say, and I must commend the government, that the country is mobilizing a Blue Bonds initiative that will contribute to marine conservation in perpetuity. But we need to also keep in mind how do certain types of development projects that could degrade and erode some of our natural areas and protected areas, how does that mar our efforts as a country with marine conservation? So we need to ensure, we need to keep in mind, we shouldn't feel that we want our cake and eat it too. The Blue Bonds initiative demonstrates the conservation community's commitment. The government will depend a lot on the NGO community for this to happen. The conservation community's commitment and investment in our nation's economic development. So we need to just keep in mind, always remember, I would advise the government, the important role and contribution that the NGO community provides. So, as I wrap up, Madam President, I just want to mention that what we must do is to work towards and establish a better partnership that will be a win for Belizeans and Belize. It is important for us to remember that the Belize Maya Forest lands and the Maya Forest Corridor lands were purchased from private owners, not from the Crown. I cannot stress more that the government did not contribute to acquiring those lands, to the acquisition of those lands. So it is because of that, and let's think about it. Government did not contribute to acquiring those lands, so should they see themselves as owning the carbon rights and carbon sequestration potential of forests that others took to secure and to protect? Is that fair for government to have the sole right to determine where those proceeds will go, rather than a real partnership, a close partnership with those organizations that, through their tremendous efforts, raise the money to secure these properties? That if they had not done so, there would be, and I am confident about this, there would be large-scale forest clearing in those areas. We need to use our forests wisely, our land wisely. There will be the need to clear certain lands for agriculture. That is understood. But if those lands had not been secured, in a matter of a short time, we would not have the forests to talk about at the extent that they are there right now, and carbon rights and credits to talk about. that we can talk about right now because those areas are secured, should be secured in perpetuity. So, Madam President, I will not beg forgiveness for not saying only good things about these motions on the table. I wish I did not have any criticisms to make, but it's important that I said what I have said. As I have pointed out, the support from the government could have gone further. But I must still support the motion because of the importance and significance of those two conservation lands, the Belize Maya Forest and the Maya Forest Corridor. I commend the conservation partners for their commitment and dedication to make this happen. I commend the previous administration for having started to get the ball rolling so that we can be talking about this right now. So, all these criticisms aside, the current administration and its predecessors, recognizing as important the value of the protection efforts of those two conservation trust properties for the people and government of Belize. It is important for the Belizean public to understand that these areas provide goods and services, tangible and intangible, that contribute to our health and wealth as a nation, watershed protection, water quality, abundant wildlife and biodiversity, contribute to a significant nature-based tourism product, insurance, and mitigation against impacts of floods, droughts, and other climate change impacts, livelihoods, conservation and ecotourism, among others. I hope, Madam President, as the months go by, as the years go by, our government will see the wisdom in strengthening the partnership with its non-government partners. Being the eternal optimist, Madam President, I am sure that will happen one day. I thank you.
I recognize Senator Elena Smith.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to make a few comments on the motion before us, Madam President, but before I do, I'd like your indulgence in also wishing our Belizean people a happy, safe, and responsible, and I'm not sure if I should say celebration, but maybe commemoration of our 10th and our Independence Day. I trust that we will recognize the numbers that we are seeing of late in terms of COVID, and that we would ensure that we abide by all protocols as we commemorate these upcoming days. Madam President, the motions before us, I would first like to associate ourselves with some of the comments that my colleague Senator Salas made earlier. And I also wish to reiterate the importance of conservation to our nation. At the NTUCB, Madam President, we are in support of the motions. However, we are seeking from the leader of government business maybe some sort of explanation, maybe a bit more details on some of these matters. And so when we look at the benefits, if you will, the question arises as to what really and truly would that be. We know that, yes, the conservation community, would be, we would have these areas and we would be taking care of these areas, but in terms of, say, in general, what would be other benefits that our people can look forward to? And then one of the concerns that we note, and I think that is normally what we see in some of these agreements, where acquisition and other costs, are normally deducted, and then what is left would be used to assist in the conservation. And so we are wondering if what that excess, what that would be and how much that would be able to do in terms of, after hearing what my colleague just said, how much would that be able to assist in conservation efforts? And so I don't know if Senator Courtney would be able to share with us if there, what would be projected yields from this revenue yields, in terms of the cost that what would be deducted, if we have any idea more of what that would be. It might not be possible to say put a cap on these costs, but maybe we would have some kind of an indication of what that would be so that we could have an idea of maybe what it is that we would be left with to assist in the conservation efforts. And again, would that be sufficient to assist these conservation groups in terms of carrying out their responsibilities as conservation for this area? And so those are the areas that we would like to have some sort of maybe clarity, some information on those areas. But getting that information, Madam President, then we would be able to fully support these two motions. I thank you.
I recognize Senator Bevan-Cal.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Also, with your permission, I would like to wish all Belizeans a responsible and a happy September celebration. Madam President, I rise to make my contribution on this motion presented today. Looking at the past deal that the past UDP government made with TNC and other parties, Madam President, it begs the question when Senator Perry talks about respect. I'm not sure how we can show them respect if they have breached the Finance and Audit Reform Act, which requires that the government, before disposing of any public assets with an aggregate value of above $2 million, must obtain the approval of the National Assembly, which obviously they did not do. But in line with our good governance agenda, Madam President, we're now here to present it to the National Assembly. Madam President, the UDP administration agreed to remit, waive, and exempt the payment of stamp duties and land taxes to a number of environmental groups. And this is a total of about 236 or more acres of land, Madam President. As a responsible government, we had to renegotiate these terms and came up with a supplemental agreement. And this agreement includes the payment of land taxes, which will yield about $20 million for over the 50 years that was exempted, Madam President. $20 million can do a lot to our Belizean people for the next 50 years. TNC also have agreed with the government of Belize to secure investments of about another $20 million for the people of Belize. Madam President, carbon rights and carbon credits is now a big thing when it comes to climate change. And obviously, our little Belize, has a lot of our land that is still covered by forest. And the carbon rights that we can get on the market that is out right now, Madam President, we can get millions of dollars that can again benefit the government and the people of Belize. We can assist them in social and other support that is much needed, especially in these dire times caused by COVID-19. Madam President, we applaud the government of Belize for taking a bold step to renegotiate the terms that was done by the last UDP administration. I think as a responsible government, we need to make sure that any and every deal that is made must benefit the Belizean people. And Madam President, this supplemental agreement is clearly showing that our Belizean people will definitely Madam President, this supplemental agreement is clearly showing that our people, our Belizean people, will benefit from this renegotiation. Madam President, in closing, I would like to again congratulate the government on this renegotiation. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Darrell Bradley.
Madam President, I wish to offer just a few observations in relation to both of the motions. I want to echo the sentiment of Senator Salas in relation to his presentation and commentary. I've been hearing some back and forth in terms of what one administration did and the other administration and what was good or what was not good. I think that what is important here is a recognition of the importance of the environment. And I think that what is fundamentally important from what Senator Salas indicated is, notwithstanding which government is involved, the environment itself is tremendously important and valuable to Belizeans. Madam President gave a very eloquent opening presentation about the celebration of our 40th anniversary of independence. And if you look at all of our national symbols, one of the things that is universal both in our flag and in our anthem and in all of our national symbols is to the extent at which the Belizean ethos reflects a respect for the environment. And I think that it is important to also appreciate from Senator Salas's comment the economic value that agreements like this can bring and partnerships like this can bring. And I think it is within that context that he made the comment, which I think should not be lost in the debate, about meaningful discussion in relation to cost sharings and the sacrifices that environmental groups show to preserve the environment. These lands were acquired by private efforts, and that brings a significant advantage to the Belizean public. There's some public good. There is a tremendous public good that has arisen as a result of that. And when one group brings that to the table, I think that it is a valuable point, which I do not want to be lost in the cross debate about UDP and PUP, that there should be meaningful recognition about that in the language of the agreement. So I'm not au fait, and I was not a party to any type of discussion. I'm not very knowledgeable in relation to carbon credits and the environmental advantages of that. I'm sure that the persons with respect to the government would have negotiated in good faith. But I do respect the points that Senator Salas mentioned, that if this is public lands, there should be a recognition in relation to, not that it's public lands, but if the lands are used for trust purposes and if there's a public benefit for that, there is a recognition in relation to the tax credits, the land tax abatements and so forth, and those things have value in any debate. We are not the government, and the government is responsible for negotiating those agreements, but that argument is very valid and it should be recognized, notwithstanding what any previous administration would have done, lacking the authority to waive certain things. The argument that he puts forward in terms of the economic value that that partnership brings and recognition that there should be some financial returns because the environmental groups would have sacrificed tremendously, that is in negotiation. So that I want to echo his point that there is value in recognizing that environmental groups bring a lot to the table in terms of their partnership with government, and that partnership should have a financial and tangible outcome. I'm sure that these environmental groups, if they were given an abatement in relation to land tax, they would not keep the money for themselves. They would reinvest the money back into the preservation of the environment. That has a public good and a tremendous value. So that in respect, and I wasn't going to add any comment because I see the agenda was very big, but I saw two senators make a comment in relation to the politics of it. But his point is very, very valuable and very timely on this occasion that we're celebrating what we treasure as Belizeans, including our environment, and recognizing financial, tangible values to stakeholders, I think is an important part of the debate. To what extent I could lend my support to the government reconsidering any aspect of land tax abatement, I would support that.
I recognize Senator Christopher Cowie.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I would like to start off with apologizing. I think my colleagues having the benefit of a copy of the agreement would certainly have helped in appreciating the finer points, the particulars, and I certainly undertake to share with the clerk for distribution to the members of the Senate. That said, I think with respect to this supplemental agreement, and in particular the resolutions put forward that come out of the supplemental agreement, I would like to make a few comments in respect thereof. This effort has been a process that involved the past administration and their original agreement. And once the new administration came to recognize the commitments already given, it was important for the new administration to revisit and look at what is the best deal we can get for Belize. We represent people, so we have to strike a balance. Striking a balance between protection of biodiversity and sustainable human development. As I mentioned before, we represent people. So when we look at that situation, how can we ignore the complete waiver of all taxes, the complete abandonment of any interest in carbon credits, especially when we were in the midst of a pandemic, when we were in the midst of an economic recession, a deep economic recession? How can we give away those monies willy-nilly? So we have to look at striking that balance, and I am very grateful for the Nature Conservancy and Rewild in their joint press release just last week, Friday, when they recognized the importance of that balance. With the government, they expressly recognize the importance of the balance between the protection of biodiversity and sustainable human development. We talk about protection of the environment and the costs associated with the protection of the environment and conservation. And yes, there are costs. And I can use this Maya Forest Trust lands as an example. We're talking about between 236,000 and 260,000 acres of land. That's a substantial land mass as a part of our country. When we look at our country, 8,867 square miles, what does that translate to? A little over 5.5 million acres. So 260,000 acres plus the next 30,000 from Maya Forest Corridor, that represents 5% of the country's landmass. So now when you look at the cost and the maintenance and protection of these conservation lands, let's say it's 2 million, or let's say it's 4 million a year that requires maintenance for. 5% is it equates to that 4 million. So multiply that by 20 to get to the 100%. What are you generating then? $80 million. 4 million times 20 is $80 million. Can you run a country on $80 million? Our GDP, our average income per capita, is roughly $8,000 per person. Our GDP is roughly $3.5 billion. You cannot have an economy on surviving 420,000 people surviving on $80 million. You need to have economic activity as well. We need to have sustainable human development. There has to be a balance. So getting back to the agreement, we look at the terms of that agreement, and to be honest, we have to thank the UDP administration. We have to thank the UDP administration for not understanding the law. They didn't understand the Land Tax Act. They didn't understand the Land Tax Act, and they didn't understand the law on carbon credits. So that is what in fact provided us with the leverage to negotiate. You have unenforceable provisions in this agreement. You have a failure to recognize the vesting of these carbon credits in the Constitution. What did you agree with the TNC on? What did you agree with the Rewild on? You committed to something that you could not do. So that, I say I thank you, because you gave us the leverage. You gave us the leverage to negotiate a better deal for Belize. We went from a weak deal to a better deal. In the negotiations with the TNC and Rewild, I think it's important to speak to some of the concerns raised by Senator Salas and Senator Smith and even Senator Bradley regarding the costs associated with the conservation of these lands. In the original agreement, what was agreed first in terms of the land tax was full waiver, zero for 50 years. Well, as Senator Kal spoke to, what we've renegotiated will generate $20 million over 50 years. I don't know who can complain about that. For $20 million to come to the government and people of Belize. As far as the carbon credits under the original agreement was purportedly assigning all rights associated with the carbon sequestration in respect of those lands. Now, that included any and all acquisition costs, or I should say, including but not limited to the 50% acquisition costs, the endowment, and the management costs. It wasn't limited to that, but it already included that in the agreement, in the original agreement that was signed on October 19, 2020. So that was already given up. But it wasn't limited to that. It was all carbon rights associated with those conservation lands. Those were purportedly given up. So what was negotiated with the leverage that we had was that there would be a cap. What you spoke about, there was a cap. And it's a high level cap. And it's useful to appreciate the breakdown, because that 50% of acquisition costs, that's roughly $38.5 million. This property was bought for over $72 million US. So that 50% acquisition cost, you know what? Those carbon credits that were vested in the government of Belize, those carbon credits are what was agreed would pay for half those acquisition costs. So when you talk about the private monies going to buy private lands not from government, in effect, government resources was committed to pay for that acquisition. 50% of the acquisition costs. The endowment costs were committed. To clarify, what is endowment? There's management costs, your running costs, and then there's the endowment that enables the funding of your management costs in perpetuity. So there's no concern that monies will not be available to manage and conserve the relevant lands. That endowment, by way of investment, provides the revenue that will support the management in perpetuity. So that was accounted for in the original agreement and was maintained under the supplemental agreement. So it is not that there will be costs separate costs that will need to, or separate funds that will need to be procured, because those are already covered under the endowment that will be funded through the sale of the carbon credits. So that's not an issue as far as seeking alternative resources. So those properties are covered. As far as the maintenance, protection of those conservation lands, those properties are covered by the same carbon credit proceeds. So what was negotiated was that residual amount. So when you look in the case of the TNC agreement, that 50% acquisition cost, that's the 38.5 million or thereabouts, US, and the endowment and management costs, capped. What we negotiated was a cap of 15 million on that. So that puts us to around $54 million as what was to come out of the carbon credits. The excess of that is what comes to government, and government decides the use of that excess. The estimation on the carbon credits associated with that is tied to the tons of carbon associated with the verified carbon associated with the conservation lands. That range is between 10 and 13 million. At $5 a ton, you're looking at 65 million. The price range varies, but roughly you're ranging between, currently, between 4 and 10, sometimes even more, US dollars per ton. But right now, in terms of pricing, at $5 per ton, you're looking at 1365 million US dollars. When you net off the capped amount, you're at around 10 million US excess, and possibly more depending on how the price of the carbon credits goes. And similarly, with the rewild, the arrangement is similar again. Payment of land taxes and the residual after, in the case of rewild, a cap of 15 million on the acquisition cost and the endowment. So that is what has been negotiated. It seems to me that the Nature Conservancy and we were pleased with the restructured arrangement, and thus the reason that they were willing to sign or to issue a joint release with the government, indicating as much. So I think in looking at that balance between sustainable human development and protection of biodiversity, that is what this government has sought to do, and I think that is what was accomplished in this supplemental agreement. And now we are here today simply to complete and perfect the commitments under that supplemental agreement by putting forward these motions, which absolutely acknowledge and set forth that these assets are public assets vested in the government of Belize, and that we will follow through in the terms of the agreement, but we will make sure that the law is applied and that the government is recognized as holding these assets. I think one last piece I would add is that the legislative framework so far as carbon credits is, in a sense, in its infancy. We have the constitutional recognition of these carbon credits. However, when you look at benefit sharing, developing a benefit sharing framework for private land owners, I think that is the next step that this administration will be embarking upon. But that's not necessary at this point in time, but that is, I think, forthcoming in the not too distant future. Thank you.
The minister spoke about an agreement that was not given to us in our papers. I mean, we have that agreement before the debate continues.
Senator Cowie, would you answer?
Yes, that's what I just said, that I undertook to provide copies of the agreements to the clerk.
Before the debate is finished? I mean, maybe there's something in it. We should have had it from before today.
Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I am very happy that the government has been able to resolve this issue and bring it to the Senate today. I am also, I support tremendously efforts to protect the environment. But like Minister Koi said just now, I think a balance has to be struck at some point. And so my only comment this morning is that I think that at some point we should determine how much of our national lands, how much of our natural marine resources will be put into conservation. I think that has to be a policy initiative. And I heard Minister Koi mention just now that they'll be bringing a carbon credits legislation at some point. And so I think that will form a part of that policy. But overall, I think that while we support that we have to protect the environment, while we support that carbon credits is important and is very current in terms of gaining value for the country, still, when we look at all of conservation, we have to strike a balance with respect to the developmental part of it. For example, you look at whenever you have these national lands or any part of those areas in conservation, it's really an opportunity cost in one way with respect to the potential to find minerals in those areas, whether we're talking about oil or other minerals. And so while it looks very favorable at this point in terms of, well, 0 to a couple million dollars with respect to the carbon credits and what you're receiving from those, if, for example, you'd find something like oil in those areas, I mean, it could change that scenario very, very quickly. And so while like I said, I support the resolutions, I just think at some point we have to have, we have to determine how much of Belize will be put into conservation in terms of the lands and the marine resources. That's my comment. Thanks.
I recognize Senator Bishop Alvin Bengisha.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I want to say first of all that I join with other senators in saying happy 10th September and happy independence to every Belizean at this time. Certainly it is a time for us as we celebrate 40 years of existence to be able to join with the Honorable George Kittle Price in what was said in our national prayer, the preservation of the nation. And I think that a part of the preservation of the nation, especially at this time, is to ensure that as citizens, in order to preserve mankind, especially in Belize, that we continue to promote our vaccine and suggest to all those who have not yet done so to ensure that they be a part of nation building in taking their vaccine. I want to also indulge this House a little, Madam President, in also recognizing today, and I share this with us, the death of one of our clergymen who in 1981 would have preached one of the sermons as a part of the independence celebration. And so we recognize the death of the Reverend Dr. Claude Cadogan in Jamaica. He died at 106. And we would hope, Madam President, that when the Methodist Church opens the Book of Condolence on September 22nd, that both yourself and the leader of government business in the Senate will be invited to sign the book. I want to just make 3 quick points on the motion. First of all, to indicate, Madam President, that I do support what is before us, the motion that is before us. I hasten to say, however, that in other countries, as we speak to the issue of forestry preservation, that what is used in other countries is that it is the rights instead of ownership that is used in other countries. Carbon rights, I believe, should be linked to the use rights. And I think perhaps maybe as we go forward in the future in negotiating some of these things, we have to think more about rights instead of ownership. The conservation rights of any country is important. We're here speaking of carbon rights as a form of property rights, but we must ensure that in the use of the land, be it by companies or anybody else, it must be understood that the property remains that of all the Belizean people. And we must continue to emphasize that aspect, that it is not for individuals, it remains the property of the Belize people. And when we speak of the issue of rights, Madam President, we must also base the approach on what is good for all of Belize. We must look to the development of the economic base of our country. As I said, it must include all Belizeans, but it must also be based on international standards and goals of human rights systems and its plans and processes. We must, as a country, have to look again at our laws to make sure that it is aligned with the very motion before us today, especially our laws having to do with forest tenure and rights. There can be conflicts between statutory and customary laws, and so it is important that we continue to look at all these things. As I said, Madam President, that I rise to support the motion before us, but I want to continue to emphasize that perhaps in the future, instead of looking at the whole issue of ownership and what we will hand over to people, that for the sake of Belizeans, that perhaps a part of the negotiation can be rights instead of ownership. And there, in this short way, I would like to end my contribution this morning, and I thank you.
I recognize Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I start first by thanking all the members who spoke, who, if I got it right, everyone supported the two resolutions before the Honorable Senate. We will not cede 1 millimeter to the UDP in terms of our environmental record. The People's United Party government has been the leader on environmental protection in this country from God make morning. So don't come here pretending that you have any righteousness on the question of environmental protection. Most of the environmental areas in this country have been promulgated and protected by the People's United Party. So let me just start by saying that. And I want, Madam President, to respond to concerns expressed by Senator Salas and taken up by Senator Bradley. You would get the impression, at least I got the impression, that Senator Koi held a bazooka at the head of the people of TNC until they signed on the dotted line. You know, it's important that we be clear, Madam President, on this matter. TNC, Rewile, and the government issued a press release. TNC and Rewile made no complaint. TNC and Rewile did not criticize the government. TNC and Rewile praised the government of Belize. Let's not get confused. TNC in fact, publicly praised the partnership with the government of Belize. But you know what? Let me read from it, because I will show you the difference between us and the people on the other. Well, I want to confine it to Senator Perry. He was in cabinet. With your permission, Madam President, I will read from a part of the joint press release, and all senators should read it for themselves. It starts off, 3rd of September 2021. The government of Belize, Rewell, and the Nature Conservancy have agreed, not forced, agreed to cooperate in the implementation of a strategy and mutual undertaking of the parties for the benefit of the government and people of Belize to protect and conserve their natural ecosystems and its services, as well as its biodiversity in perpetuity, while seeking to support sustainable human development. Now listen to what they say. Recognizing the economic crisis that Belize has been facing from combined climate and pandemic impacts, by way of supplemental agreements that amend the terms of agreements signed by the government in October of last year, the government of Belize, Rewell, and the Nature Conservancy have now agreed to a new model, not that old one signed in October, for conservation by providing guidelines for how protected land will be taxed and outlines how the proceeds from the sale of carbon credits will be distributed. So, Senator Perry, you came here telling me that I must swallow my vomit. Let me tell you something. The United Democratic Party government, Hugo Pat, I sit down and I listen quietly. Say what you want to say, Senator.
Rise to make a point of order, Madam President.
Pardon me?
I rise to make a point of order.
On what point, Senator?
I make a point of order under Standing Order 36, which deals with the content of speeches, including 1 and 5. And I do this reluctantly, because I have tremendous respect for the leader of government business, and I want to say that first. But I've been in the Senate before, and I've been in the Senate now, and I don't like when either government does it, UDP and PUP. The motion before us, and this has to do with relevance and improper motive, the motion before us has to do with something that's very important, which is the environment. And one can argue the policy and the aspects of tax abatements versus whatever, but the specific reference by the honorable leader of government business is to specific words that the leader of the opposition business would have said, including words to the effect of eating whatever or so forth. That has nothing to do with the motion before this honorable House. What would have been the issue is whether or not the motion should have been passed. So what I would object to is the specific reference in terms of calling out the leader of government business himself and the record in relation to both PUP and UDP in terms of the environment. We're not discussing or debating the record. That's beyond the scope of the motion.
Could you get to the point?
It's not relevant and it is improper motive because you signaled out a minister. You signaled out
Noted, Senator Dara Badley. Senator, Leader of Government Business, you may proceed.
Much
and I
obliged, Madam
ask
President.
that you confine your words and your comments to the motion as it relates.
Resolution has to do with the Nature Conservancy.
Senator Amon Courtney, I just ask that you confine your comments and your words to the motion today. However, I recognize that you may bring in certain words to support the motion today, but I ask that we refrain from using the names of other ministers and former ministers of government, and we simply focus on the motion today and whatever support you wish to give to that motion.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Bradley, for expressing your respect for me. You know what? A blast Kugopat, I won't do it. I said, Madam President, and I repeat, the leader of government business said that I must swallow my vomit. I will repeat. That's what he said. He should hang his head in shame. The United Democratic Party government, as I said on the previous occasion, and I will repeat until thy kingdom come, sold out to the TNC and Rewile under the agreement. And that is why we entered into negotiations to renegotiate them in the interest of the Belizean people, and we make no apology for that. None whatsoever. Let us listen to what they said. Listen and learn. And I want to congratulate...
Mike, I remind you of Standing Order number 40. If we can maintain silence while the leader of the government business is speaking.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And I want to go on record congratulating Senator Christopher Correa, the Minister of State in Finance, for excellent negotiations on behalf of the government and people of Belize. I just want to read one more paragraph, Madam President, from what this press release says. Continuing from what it says about the economic crisis that the government was experiencing. It goes on to say, the government of Belize, Rewile, and the Nature Conservancy have now agreed to a new model for conservation by providing guidelines for how protected land will be taxed and outlines how the proceeds from the sale of carbon credits will be distributed. Such enhancements will now mean an additional Belize 20 million in land taxes to the government for over 50 years, and the government having the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of a portion of the proceeds of sale of the carbon credits associated with the conservation lands that may mean millions of additional dollars to the benefit of the people of Belize. TNC has further committed to work with the government of Belize to secure investment of approximately Belize 20 million over 10 years in order to improve regenerative agriculture and climate resilient land management in the region of the Belize Maya Forest. Madam President, why is this important? Senator Salas spoke about the need for partnership. That's what TNC says. That's what Rewile says. They have entered a new partnership with the government of Belize, negotiated by us for the benefit of the people of Belize. So we should not be afraid of this revised agreement. It is in partnership with the environmental stakeholders. We have a long history of it, a proud history of it, and we will not allow anyone to suggest or imply that we have failed in our duty in this regard. Absolutely not. We have a partnership with TNC, and we have a partnership with Rewile with respect to this 236,000 acres. And let me be clear. I criticize the agreement of October 2000, and I will criticize it until thy kingdom come, because it was a sellout. Nobody in this Senate can come here in their right mind, discharging their duty to people and country, and criticize the People's United Party for having gained $56 million for the people of this country. That is what Chris Cowie and the People's United Party achieved. It's better than that. It's better than that. Empty crocus bag make the most noise, Madam President, no worry. It is better than that. Under the old agreement, the United Democratic Party agreement, they gave away all carbon rights related to this land, and Senator Salas, we will have a philosophical difference, a respectful one. Because the Constitution of this country, Section 17, says that the carbon right is a natural resource that belongs to the people of Belize. And so, we make no apology for saying that we have agreed with the TNC and Rewire that after certain costs are recovered, because we own the carbon rights, because the people own the carbon rights, that we should determine how the excess money is to be spent. We make no apology for that because that is in the interest of the people of this country, and it is what the United Democratic Party gave away. Come here and talk about vomit. You should be ashamed. I repeat, after certain costs are recovered in our supreme sovereignty, we will determine how the excess money from the carbon credits are to be spent. And Senator Salas, I want to make a prediction. And I want to surprise you. I want to comfort you. I want you to sleep well at night. We are working with TNC and Rewire, and you all with this money, excess money, you know it's going to go into carbon protection of the environment. But we, as the government of the day, as the owners of this natural resource, must determine how it is going to be spent. And I have every confidence, assuming we are in government, I can't speak for other people, that we will continue our strong partnership with the TNC and Rewire and ensure that the excess money goes towards conservation objectives. I close by drawing to the attention of this Honorable Senate. The record must reflect. I came here and I criticized the sellout. What do we have today? TNC will pay approximately $364,000 every year for the next 50 years, $18.2 million in land taxes. They said, take it all. Senator Salas, we have a difference of opinion on that. Rewire will pay $42,000 every year, $2.1 million over the next 50 years, coming to a total of $20 million secured for the people of Belize by the People's United Party. The carbon credits, the expectation, Madam President and members of the Senate, and it's an estimation because the price varies, but over the period, after money has been paid to cover the cost, the government and people of Belize will get an estimated $25 million secured for the people of Belize by the People's United Party government. And we go further. We have gotten these big, reputable international environmental organizations to accept and recognize that the carbon rights in Belize belong to Belize. Finally, as the press release said, the TNC has agreed to seek investments of an additional $20 million to be invested in regenerative agriculture. I am sure Senator Salas supports that. So we come here today. Everybody supports the two resolutions. Everybody supports it. But, Madam President, what we have to say is that the People's United Party is different from the United Democratic Party. We will enter into difficult and tough negotiations for the benefit and protection of the Belizean people. And where there are taxes to be recovered, we will seek to recover them. Where there are carbon credits to be shared, the proceeds, we will seek to get it and to share it for the Belizean people. And where there is additional investment in conservation, we will, on behalf of the Belizean people, enter into agreements with reputable environmental organizations for the benefit of the Belizean people. Where Senator Coe started is the point. And indeed, Senator Herrera, I want to congratulate you for emphasizing and underscoring the question of balance. Senator Coe started by saying we represent people. Ultimately, those land taxes that were given away by, I won't call his name, by them, that we're now going to collect, is for the people. TNC and Rewell recognize that we're in a financial bind. And in those circumstances, you have to negotiate and negotiate hard for the people. When we talk about regenerative agriculture, what does that mean? It means that we will be attracting investment into, what's the best way to describe it, Senator Salas? Environmentally friendly, sensitive types of agriculture that do not destroy the environment. Don't come here pretending that they have some record on environmental protection that we don't have. And the final point, I said final already, but this is the final. Assure, we have secured TNC's commitment for a majority of Belizean control active management of the conservation land, comprising government and local non-government representation. Senator Salas will like that. We secured that, you all did not. So, Madam President, position is very simple. We have moved to protect the Belizean people's interests. The supplemental agreement of August 2001 advances the interests of the Belizean people. It corrects the many faults of the October 2000 agreement signed by the United Democratic Party, and we stand here proudly in support of the two resolutions that are before the Senate. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Honorable members, the question is, now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable House approves the Government of Belize to transfer to the Belize Maya Forest Trust and to the Maya Forest Corridor Trust the carbon rights and credits associated therewith in connection with the conservation lands for the sole use and benefit of the conservation, protection and maintenance of the conservation lands, provided that after certain acquisition costs, endowment costs, and management costs are reimbursed in accordance with the terms of the principal agreement as amended by the supplemental agreement, the government shall have the exclusive right to determine the use and disposition of such excess or surplus amount of proceeds of sale of the carbon rights and credits associated therewith. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Standing Order 10-8, I move that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at today's sitting at any hour though opposed.
Honorable members, the question is that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour though opposed. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bills for second reading.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Components Act, Chapter 250 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to remove the fee for certifying documents as in compliance with the Act, to allow for certain fees to be prescribed by order published in the Gazette, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, a very short bill that makes provision for removing the fee for the issuance of a certificate. And then secondly, it provides and empowers the minister to issue regulations for collecting fees for certain things. I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Companies Act, Chapter 250 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to remove the fee for certifying documents as in compliance with the Act, to allow for certain fees to be prescribed by order published in the Gazette, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Companies Act, Chapter 250 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to remove the fees for certifying documents as in compliance with the Act, to allow for certain fees to be prescribed by order published in the Gazette, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Duties Act, Chapter 64 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to exempt certain documents of a company from the payment of stamp duties and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this bill is related to the one we just discussed, because what it does is seeks to remove the stamp duty payable on these incorporating foundational documents. Question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Stamp Duties Act, Chapter 64 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to exempt certain documents of a company from the payment of stamp duties and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Stamp Duties Act, Chapter 64 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to exempt certain documents of a company from the payment of stamp duties and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Duties Act, Chapter 64 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to exempt public officers from the charge of stamp duties on certain instruments and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this amendment seeks to discharge government's commitment to public officers with respect to removing stamp duty on certain transactions as a part of our understanding when the pay cut was introduced.
I recognize Senator Osmani Salas.
Just a quick matter on this, Madam President, which I think we can correct in committee. I noticed that the previous bill and this one make reference to the insertion of 55B. So I reached out to the Attorney General and asked if that had been an oversight, and I just want to share, with your permission, what she responded. If you notice, colleagues, both bills refer to the insertion of 55B. Obviously, we cannot have two 55Bs. And she responded that legal drafter informs that the first was in May of 2021 and the second was an IFSC instruction which was approved by the Prime Minister. He informs that nothing further was ever heard or instructed on the first. As to the second, that was actively pursued by IFSC in their fee restructuring. Since IFSC's amendment was being pursued, it would have rightly been renumbered 55B, since there was no amendment yet in motion. The first, which is now the second, when eventually put forward, should have then been renumbered as 55C. So just just a matter I believe we can correct in committee. Thank you.
So noted.
Senator Salas. Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Stamp Duties Act, Chapter 64 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to exempt public officers from the charge of stamp duties on certain instruments and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
The bill for an act to amend the Stamp Duties Act, Chapter 64 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to exempt public officers from the charge of stamp duty on certain instruments and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Tax Administration and Procedure Act, Act Number 8 of 2019, to authorize the Director General to publish the names of tax defaulters in the Gazette and any local newspaper, to amend the general provisions of Part 10 of the criminal proceedings pertaining to the prosecution of tax offenses, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this bill again comes as a part of our commitment at the time of the budget to seek to recover taxes, outstanding taxes. It makes provision for the publication of tax defaulters and a more expeditious way for prosecuting persons guilty or allegedly guilty of offenses under the Act.
I recognize Senator Michael Perfit.
Yes, thanks, Madam President. Certainly we support the payment of taxes, and we want those who violate to indeed be embarrassed, arrested, and charged, no matter who they are. Doesn't matter that you happen to be the family member of a senior minister. You should be charged if you don't pay your taxes. But, Madam President, I just see something in here. I don't know if maybe the Leader of Government Business would want to consider it, because it seems kind of inconsistent. It says here at 4A, no prosecution for an offense under this Act, a tax law, or any regulations made thereunder shall be instituted. No prosecution shall be even instituted. You will give the impression even started, except by or with the consent in writing of the DPP or the Director General of the Tax Department. Now, if it were to stop there, then that would be very clear, as it does exist in other pieces of legislation, where in the criminal code, for example, certain offenses can only be prosecuted upon the written consent of the DPP. However, when you look at the proviso to this section, it seems to take away that consent requirement from the DPP or the Director General. It says, provided that this subsection shall not prevent the arrest or the issue or execution of a warrant for the arrest or any person in respect of such an offense, or the remand in custody or on bail of any person charged with such an offense, notwithstanding that the necessary consent to the institution of proceedings for the offense has not been obtained. Well then, what's the point of the previous paragraph if the proviso takes away the entire power of consent? It's just a structural thing, because if you look at this, you're saying you cannot institute any prosecution against a person without first having the consent of the DPP or the Director General. However, if you look at this, the police can arrest you, charge you, take you to court. The magistrate can remand you to prison or give you bail. You're already out there in the public sphere, and then the DPP or the Director General can then say, you know what? We don't consent to that person being charged, arrested and charged in that way, but then it don't happen. It has already happened. And for the most part, for better or for worse, when people are arrested, taken to court, before the magistrate, whether they're remanded or bailed, the public don't find them guilty already. So I would like to see a piece of legislation where before you arrest a person, take a person to court, object to bail or agree to bail or whatever, I would like to see a piece of legislation that says the Director General or the DPP must sign off on that or consent to that before the person is wrongly embarrassed and detained. So that is my only difficulty with the piece of legislation. The proviso seems to take away the consent requirement from the DPP or the Director General. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Madam President, I rise to make a few comments on the bill before us. I think that, you know, I agree and support the initiative and the move to collect government's revenues and taxes that are outstanding. Where I have the issue, Madam President, is really with the process. There are times in the past, there are times in the past where the tax administration has been wrong with respect to assessments. There are legitimate disagreements from time to time. And I think there should be a process where these issues can be vented, where both this side that is being assessed can make their arguments, can make their case, before we reach a point where, like Senator Perifit mentioned, where their names are put in the public, published, embarrassed, judged by the public as guilty, and have all these reputational damages that will result from something like this. I don't see anywhere in the bill where it says that there will be a process either with respect to the tax administration going through an assessment, a discussion, there's feedback from the entity or person who's being assessed, where those issues can be resolved before names are published, before the public shaming takes place. There is no mention of when a default is triggered. At what point is it considered a default? Is it at the point of assessment? And I might have a legitimate reason why I think that assessment is wrong. If you look at the Income Tax Act, it looks at, you can be looking at taxable income, which means that expenses are taken out before. I can have expenses in there that I think is legitimate where the tax department might disagree with me. And that is just one example, Madam President, where I think that, you know, you can have legitimate cause for disagreement with the Commissioner of Income Tax. And maybe even when we go through this process, Madam President, there's still maybe the way it's structured is, in my view, is extremely harsh. For example, the first publishing can be tin numbers, as an example, before you get into the publishing of the names out there. Simply again, it gives another opportunity before people are publicly shamed, before entities are publicly shamed, to try to resolve those issues with the Income Tax Department. We have to go back to the core of what the objective is. The objective of the government, of the tax department, is to collect those outstanding taxes, not necessarily to shame individuals, not necessarily to damage individuals' reputations. And so, if that is the objective, then it's not inconsistent in that regard to the first publication be tin numbers where, and as well as tin numbers where those entities are not readily identified by the public. And so I think that is a key point and would actually soften the harshness of what we're looking at accomplishing. Like I said, we don't have any issues going and trying to collect legitimate taxes that are outstanding, but then there's sometimes when there's legitimate disagreements with the tax department, and we've seen many of those in the past. There should even be an attempt by the tax department to serve notices on those persons whose taxes are outstanding. And those are, I'm talking about private notices. I'm not talking about publishing those names in the Gazette, publishing them in one of the leading newspapers in the country. Again, I think those are legitimate steps. Those are genuine steps that can be taken before you reach that point where you can determine that, hey, someone does not want to pay their taxes. We have to get a little tougher on them. I think this would give a process. This would give time where the other side can work through the process, ventilate their concerns, their disagreements, and hopefully resolve the issue before you reach it. The point I'm making, the real point I'm making, Madam President, is the objective is not to shame anyone. The objective is to try to collect the taxes that are outstanding. And so publishing the name should be a last resort. It shouldn't be a first. That's the point I'm making. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Darrell Bradley.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to inquire of the Leader of Government Business in respect to Senator Herrera's comment, but what I gather is that this is just one section, and the law actually 64A, it refers to warrants. So that's actually at the enforcement section. That's when you get to the end run. And this section of the law, 64A, has to be read with the entire legislation, which starts with the Director General giving you a notice of assessment. So they will give an individual notice of assessment. That person then has the right to request a review from the Director General. That person has a right to appeal that to the Tax Appeal Tribunal. So there are already built-in legislation. There are already built-in provisions where a person can query. The legislation actually deals with instances where an alleged tax defaulter can inquire of the now Director General in relation to any errors or so forth, which is outside of any appeal board, because we do recognize that there may be mistakes. So I gather from the intent of this law is that this only deals with the publication at the end run, and you're publishing warrants. You're not publishing assessments or anything else. You're publishing warrants that now what we will do is, at the end of dealing you through all of these other processes, we're now going after you in relation to enforcing. I have no issue with the TIN number or so forth, but I just want clarification that that is in fact what you're doing. So there is a process that would have been set out in the legislation that commences with an individual notice of assessment, and what this does is that you're dealing with the end run when we can't hear from you anymore, that we'll publish your name in the Gazette.
I recognize Senator Usmani Salas.
Thanks, Madam President. I'll be very brief, just to say that I recall the words of the Prime Minister in his budget speech, where he said, and I'll just quote the last section of what I have here. He says, that government will hereafter adopt a muscular approach to revenue collection and enforcement. I believe that this is the spirit of this amendment here. And as I said in my budget remarks, there are tens upon tens of millions of dollars that have not been collected. I recall a very useful discussion I had with the Belize Tax Services, senior people there in my preparation. And I recall that one of the things they said is that we need to determine what's uncollectible, but for the rest, go at it full force. And I think this is the spirit of this amendment. We need to go after the serial defaulters. I don't believe that this will be used to go after those that might, right over the years, here and there, they might be late with payments, etc. This is to go after the serial defaulters, and we need to go after them with every possible tool we have. We need the revenue. So I support the amendment, Madam President. Thank you.
I want to respond to the two issues raised. The first raised by Senator Perry with respect to clause 4. It says, no prosecution for an offense under this act, a law, or any regulations made thereon shall be instituted except by or with the consent in writing of the Director General or the Director of Public Prosecution. A proviso follows, and in the words of Senator Perry, it removes the need for the consent. It does not. The proviso says, provided that this subsection shall not prevent the arrest or the issue or execution of a warrant for the arrest or any person in respect of such an offense, or the remand in custody or on bail of any person charged with such an offense, notwithstanding that the necessary consent to the institution of the proceedings for the offense has not been obtained. It is a saving provision. It is saying, if these things are done, it doesn't fail because the permission had not been obtained first. So, Madam President, the prosecution, which is what the subclause 2 is dealing with, prosecution must be authorized. What the next proviso is saying, but if you arrest the person, the arrest is not illegal because the permission has not yet been obtained. With respect to clause 3, the amendment to section 64, Senator Bradley is entirely correct. The law sets out a comprehensive provision for due process to be afforded to the taxpayer before you reach the point where the director will say the amount of taxes due is $10,000. You have an entire process, and notice is served on you. You can dispute it. After that dispute, by way of a review, if you still disagree, you have a right to appeal. After appeal, you still have the right to go to court to challenge the decision, and then a final figure is arrived at. Senator Herrera, I think it's important to look carefully at what Section 64A is dealing with, as highlighted by Senator Bradley. The Director General shall from time to time cause to be published in 3 consecutive issues of the Gazette, a newspaper of general circulation in Belize, or on the website of the department for no less than 21 consecutive days. And this is the key provision. And notice to all defaulters to the effect that warrants will be issued for the recovery of all taxes remaining unpaid for over 21 days. So what the notice is that you have reached the point where the amount due has been settled, you are not paying, the Director General will then say, listen, this is finished, you have exhausted your remedies, you are not paying, and as Senator Bradley will confirm, people may owe taxes not because they don't want to, but because they can't. And so they enter into agreements to pay on terms. That person will not be subject to this because you are not a defaulter. You are paying your taxes, even if it is paying on terms. What this is speaking of is where you have reached the end of the line and you are not paying. A warrant will be issued for the recovery of your taxes, but due process will be afforded to the taxpayer as provided for under the legislation. I ask that the question be put, Madam President.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Tax Administration and Procedure Act, Act Number 8 of 2019, to authorize the Director General to publish the names of tax defaulters in the Gazette and any local newspaper, to amend the general provisions of Part 10 criminal proceedings pertaining to the prosecution of tax offenses, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
The bill for an act to amend the Tax Administration and Procedure Act, number 8 of 2019, to authorize the Director General to publish the names of tax defaulters in the Gazette and any local newspaper, to amend the general provisions of Part 10, criminal proceedings pertaining to the prosecution of tax offenses, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to provide the regulation of transfer of money through electronic means and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. As the long title of the bill states, Madam President, this is a part of the government's modernizing of commercial transactions, and it makes a full comprehensive provision for conducting money transfers through electronic means, and it provides for offenses to be, it creates offenses relating to such transactions, and it also provides for protection of cardholders and persons using electronic means to transfer funds. President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to provide the regulation of the transfer of money through electronic means and to provide for matters connecting therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
The bill for an act to provide the regulation of the transfer of money through electronic means and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to give legal effect to all electronic documents, records, and signatures to repeal the Electronic Transactions Act, Chapter 2293 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Again, Madam President, a part of the government's modernizing the conduct of business, this bill seeks to make full provisions and to give legal effect to all electronic documents, records, and signatures. I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to give legal effect to all electronic documents, records, and signatures to repeal the Electronic Transaction Act, Chapter 22903 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
The bill for an act to give legal effect to all electronic documents, record, and signatures to repeal the Electronic Transaction Act, Chapter 22903 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to make provisions for electronic evidence to repeal the Electronic Evidence Act, Chapter 9501 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Again, Madam President, modernizing electronic evidence, repealing the existing law and passing a new modern act for the admissibility of electronic evidence.
I recognize Senator Osmani Salas.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we could have debated this and the following two bills as a group, since they all deal with e-governance, but I mean, be that as it may, I just wanted to offer some very brief comments on this electronic evidence bill. I noticed from some limited research I did on this that it seems to be based in large part on the model law on electronic evidence. I saw a very similar one from the Office of Civil and Criminal Justice Reform from the Commonwealth. This particular bill seems to cover all the key elements of that model law, so that was very good to see. The fact of the matter is, Madam President, is that common law rules of evidence from my read have not been adequate to deal with technological advances and need to be put in place or modernized. So my take on this bill is that it makes provision for the legal recognition of electronic records and to facilitate the admission of such records into evidence in legal proceedings. This is, along with the other two coming up, and I have very brief remarks on them as well, are very important bills, e-governance bills, and we support it. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Just briefly, Madam President, thank you. You know, like Senator Courtney, I think that, and as well as my colleague, Senator Salas, I think that these bills are badly needed. I think that it certainly brings us more current with respect to the current realities in doing business. I mean, as an example, I mean, we do all our contracts electronically, you know, from a business standpoint. We sign those contracts electronically, and so I'm very glad that, you know, these bills are being brought to the Senate for approval. One item I wanted to raise with respect to the burden to prove authenticity. I think that will be probably the biggest challenge with respect to this bill, simply because of the sophistication, I think, that exists right now with respect to false news or false information that may be perpetuated on the internet. And so I think that will be the challenge going forward with respect to this bill. And I'm hoping that that would be something that can be considered as we go forward, because you know, some of these information that is put out there looks very authentic, but is not. Thanks.
Question we put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to make provision from electronic evidence to repeal the Electronic Evidence Act, Chapter 9501 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to make provision for electronic evidence to repeal the Electronic Evidence Act, Chapter 9501 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to regulate the collection, keeping, use, and dissemination of personal data, to protect the privacy of individuals in relation to their personal data, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize Senator Darrell Bradley.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I want to congratulate the government. I think this is the data protection bill is very comprehensive, and I read through it with a legal mind to try to look at any gaps, and it was quite comprehensive in terms of fitting everything. One of the things that I did have an issue with is the table of content, or the arrangement of clauses lists section 94, which says the act binds the crown. But in terms of the actual legislation itself, there seemed to have been an amendment, because section 94 of the actual act says the minister may, by order published in the Gazette, amend the schedule. I just wanted to inquire, because I think that that is an important question as to the clarity in terms of whether or not the legislation binds the crown. I know that there is definition of persons as a data collector, data processor, and so forth, and the Interpretation Act defines a person including a public body. But I don't know if that was an earlier draft that provision was removed or so forth. And it suggests from the exemption provisions, section 32, 33 onwards, where you're exempting things that relate to criminal prosecution, national security, it does suggest that it does bind the Crown. But I think that a piece of legislation like this, you would want that clarity in relation to section 984. And so I would ask if it were removed from a previous version, if it were removed from the House, if there was some comment on it, and if the government could give some clarification if the legislation in effect does bind the Crown.
I recognize Senator Osmani Salas.
Thank you, Madam President. This is another one of those e-governance related bills that I am very happy to support. I've noticed that Belize has been one of very few countries in the world that have not put in place legislation to secure the protection of data and privacy. And I found out from the website of the UN Conference on Trade and Development that 128 out of 194 countries have such a legislation in place. In the Americas, Belize is only one of 7 countries that have not had such legislation. So it's high time that we have this in place. I associate myself with the supportive comments by Senator Bradley a little while ago. And I want to commend the government, and in particular, the Ministry of E-Governance, you know, the minister, the CEO, and their staff, as well as the Attorney General and her staff, for preparing this slew of e-governance bills that I believe are game changers in the positive sense of the term. So I'm very happy to support this bill. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Isabel Bennett.
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise to make my comments in support of the Data Protection Bill. I laughed earlier with Senator Salas because we were sharing the same reference page in respect to the United Nations Confront Trade and yeah, so we were sharing the same reference, highlighting the fact that as a nation, we are very progressive in protecting the data that we consume. Just a bit of backdrop for those of you who are listening. The World Wide Web was actually established from around 1983. And it's showing, based on the research that I came across, is that more than 4.5 billion people, or half the world population, are actually utilizing data in these little triangular gadgets that we have, whether it's a phone or an iPad. So obviously, as a nation, we need to be able to protect and safeguard the data that every single Belizean is utilizing. Of course, the internet has revolutionized our communication, the mode of how we do commerce, and it's affording us computers to network. So obviously, those in what I would refer to as Belize corporate world will have an increased access to do trade. And that kind of information that I would be sharing with another business person in another country is very, very important, very, very private, and should be kept as private and as secured as possible. So having a bill like this is very, very fundamental moving forward. I can't even overemphasize the need for this bill. I remember in one instance where I had gone to MoneyGram right here in Belmopan, and I had been there on several occasions. And this time I was in a hurry, and I was the person attending to me at the time was asking me all the other questions that she had asked me on all the other occasions before, and I was getting impatient. And I was saying, but miss, you have a computerized system. Why is it that you don't have the same information about me? And her polite response was, Miss Bennett, when you're here, we ask you all these information. We get that data from you. we do the processing of the transfer of the finances that you are receiving, and then we delete the information. In that instance, I could appreciate very much what that particular establishment was doing, in that data was being collected for me for the sole purpose of a monetary transaction. Thereafter, it's erased. However, in some instances, because of this bill now, there will be the opportunity for businesses to establish policies that can safeguard and hoard those data for future references for the purpose to which it is being utilized. So whilst I went through the bill itself, I was elated with the fact that we seem to have it very, very comprehensive. Belizeans need to understand that you have rights under this bill. There are 12 rights that are clearly outlined, and I'm asking churches, I'm asking NGOs, I'm asking every single individual really to familiarize themselves with the bill so that you can know your rights. When you know your rights, you will definitely know under this bill that you have to consent for your data to be utilized, for the processing to happen. In addition to the highlights of the 12 rights that we have in this particular bill is the fact that, of course, as always, there is a need for a commission. I have seen where other countries have a data authority, and I can see as a visionary government, we can definitely reach to that level. So having the rights, having a commission to safeguard the data, how that data is being processed from one company to one country to the next is very, very important. Please understand that this bill puts a very, very heavy fine on the commissioner if there's a breach of data, if the data gets in the hands of the wrong people. And we have seen and heard of many times where there's a hawk on international companies, and that how detrimental that can be. So obviously, with a government that is very, very focused, and as the Prime Minister likes to use the word laser focus, I stand to support this bill in its entirety.
Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to regulate the collection, keeping, use, and dissemination of personal data to protect the privacy of individuals in relation to their personal data and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to regulate the collection, keeping, use, and dissemination of personal data to protect the privacy of individuals in relation to their personal data and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to facilitate the sharing of data between public sector agencies and other entities, to provide for an Office of Data Analytics, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this is a companion bill to those that have already been debated, and I commend its contents to the Senate. Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to facilitate the sharing of data between public sector agencies and other entities, to provide for an Office for Data Analytics, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to facilitate the sharing of data between public sector agencies and other entities, to provide for an Office for Data Analytics, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act, Chapter 156 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to provide for the addition of a new category of visitor permit to allow visitors to work remotely from Belize and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Very quickly, Madam President, the bill seeks to do two things. First, to create the long-stay visitor permit to attract people who want to work remotely and want to stay in Belize for a long time. And secondly, to provide for a temporary residence permit or a temporary border crossing permits and border crossing cards. That would allow us to give people cards that would be for longer than we currently give them to cross over the borders, the western and northern borders. And then it goes on to provide the qualifications for the long stay permits.
I recognize Senator Bevancal.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of this bill. Again, Madam President, this is really good news for our tourism sector. I think this will open more opportunities for us to attract more visitors and even long stay visitors to Belize. Again, this will create jobs for our Belizean people, which we're in dire need right now, and it will also, again, rebound our economy. So once again, just putting on the record and, bringing good news to our tourism sector. Okay.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I want to commend the government for a progressive piece of legislation. I think, though, is that I still think that it's a little conservative. I would have hoped that it would have been a little more aggressive with respect to some of the provisions. And just briefly, Madam President, we went and we did a comparison with other countries, and I will share those with you in a second. This initiative, I think, is one that is very much needed, and like the senator said before me, I think it will complement what we're doing in the tourism industry. But we did a slight comparison of some of the what other countries are doing, and I will base my comments on the time of stay as well as the fees. For example, we compared Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Bermuda, Costa Rica, and Belize. In terms of the allotted stay, there are two of those countries, Antigua and Bermuda, Anguilla and Bermuda, I should say, extends the stay up to 1 year. Belize is 6 months. And actually, Costa Rica and Antigua and Barbuda is up to 2 years. And like I said, I think it's a little conservative on our part. It perhaps could have been longer to make us more competitive with some of these countries. I mean, we're talking about persons who may be working remotely, want to come to Belize during that 1 year period while they work remotely. And during that time, they're spending they're covering all their costs, their living costs, all their medical costs, all their recreation costs here. And so, in my view, it's certainly a win-win for the economy, and certainly something I think that can contribute with the economic recovery that we're looking at. And another area is in terms of the costs. If you look at Anguilla, there's no cost there's no minimum annual income. I shouldn't say cost. Annual income. There's no requirement that they have a certain amount in terms of annual income. In Antigua and Bermuda, it's $50,000 US. For Costa Rica, it's $30,000, and in Belize, it's $75,000. And I'm talking about US dollars here. And if that person, in our case, has any dependents, dependent, then that person is required to have at least 100,000 US in annual income. Again, it's a little conservative on our part. I think that we could have been a little more aggressive, and with respect to what we're talking about in terms of minimum annual income, and perhaps it could have been around the 30K or the 50K, or who knows? I mean, I'm not even sure if that aspect of it is important, because when they come here, Madam President, it's not like they will go on a welfare system that we have here, because that is almost non-existent in Belize. So they'll have to find their way to pay their expenses while they're here. And so I don't know if we should have been that conservative with respect to what we require in terms of income for them to qualify under this legislation. And then there's also the requirement, and I think the police record is a good one, and many of the 3 out of those 5 countries have that as a requirement. And then again, the health insurance coverage, I think, is an important one, because they come here, they get sick, they access our public health facilities. Whether or not they have money, they have to be treated in accordance with international provisions. And so the 2 main ones I wanted to raise this morning, Madam President, are the 2 that I highlighted: the minimum annual income as well as the length of stay. I think that we could have been a little more aggressive, a little more lenient in those areas. Thank you, Madam President.
President, in reply, and it's not much of a reply, all I can say to Senator Herrera is that this bill was drafted with the input of the Belize Tourism Board and the Ministry of Tourism. They were the ones who set out the criteria, which was approved by Cabinet. Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act, Chapter 156 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to provide for the addition of a new category of visitor permit to allow visitors to work remotely from Belize, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act, Chapter 156 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to provide for the addition of a new category of visitor permit to allow visitors to work remotely from Belize, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Act, Chapter 104 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to allow for payments out of the fund to be paid to the Attorney General's Ministry for expenses in relation to mutual legal assistance and the fight against transnational organized crime, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. The bill seeks, Madam President and members of the Senate, to enable the Attorney General's Ministry to recover some of the expenses that it incurs where it is assisting a foreign government or foreign entity with money laundering matters, and to enable the Attorney General's Ministry to assist foreign states in combating organized crime. Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Act, Chapter 104 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to allow for payments out of the fund to be paid to the Attorney General's Ministry for expenses in relation to mutual legal assistance and the fight against transnational organized crime, and to provide for matters connected therewith and incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Act, Chapter 104 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011,
to allow for payments out of the fund to be paid to the Attorney General's Ministry for expenses in relation to mutual legal assistance and the fight against transnational organized crimes, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Court of Appeal Act, Chapter 90 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to enlarge the time limits for appealing and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, any lawyer practicing in Belize will be familiar with the provision of the old Court of Appeal Act that provides that for an extension of time to be had, you have to prove that you have not been unavoidably prevented from filing the necessary notice of appeal or serving the notice of appeal. That has been construed by courts repeatedly as being exactly that, unavoidably prevented. You have to prove that you were absolutely prevented from filing on time. It has led to a lot of hardships. Legitimate appeals have not been able to be prosecuted because for some reason the other law firm or an attorney would have missed the date for the 21 days for filing the notice of appeal. This is intended to reduce the harshness and to replace it with a provision that is taken from the Eastern Caribbean states that has been interpreted to be more flexible and to give the court an opportunity to look at the circumstances as to why a notice of appeal has not been filed or been served.
I recognize Senator Darrell Bradley.
I don't have any strong opposition to the language, and I do recognize as an attorney there is situations of hardship in relation to the time limits. One of the things that I will say though is, in terms of reading the draft, and I would take the Honorable Leader of Government Business's comment of the modeling of the legislation from the Eastern Caribbean, but the draft here is, to my view, going to the reverse, so that I do believe that the standard of unavoidably prevented is a very high standard that has been interpreted by courts within Belize to be absolutely prevented. And in those circumstances, there could be a lot of injustice. But the draft here may make it, in my humble opinion, too loose, so that when you are talking about the justice of the circumstances required, the justice of the circumstances refer to the terms. It doesn't refer to whether or not there should be or should not be an extension, so that some language in there as to some standard. In other, I did look at other provisions that deal with extension of times on appeal, and there is some qualifier in there, reasonable grounds, something in there that gives legislative guidance to the judiciary as to the importance of the time limit, because we do have the reverse also, that there is a delay both on the part of attorneys and on the part of the court, and there are reasons why there are timelines, so that there has to be a certain amount of finality. Perhaps maybe the 21 days is too short. Maybe it should be 42 days. The Caribbean Court of Justice has an extended period. But I do believe that having a broad provision that does not give legislative guidance to the judiciary as to the importance why that 21 days is in there may be inimical to the efficient processing of an appeal. Like I said, I think that the bill is good, and I don't have an objection to the bill, but I do think that the legislature should put in place some guidance, if it's a reasonable explanation or some basis, to give the judiciary an indication as to what the standard is.
Understand what Senator Bradley is saying. All I can say to him is that my understanding from the Attorney General's ministry is that this has been modeled on the OECS, and I understand there are two provisions. This is the old version of the OECS extension, provision for extension, and there are many cases that have interpreted the section, and so there is judicial precedent on it that would guide the court as to how to apply the law where somebody applies for an extension. Madam President, I'd ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Court of Appeal Act, Chapter 90 of the Substantive Laws of Belize,
Revised Edition 2011, to enlarge the time limits for appealing and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Court of Appeal Act, Chapter 90 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to enlarge the time limits for appealing and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Committee of the Whole Senate on Motion and Bills.
Honorable members, in accordance with Standing Order 68A, the Senate will now resolve itself into the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee, a committee of the whole Senate, to consider the motion referred to it, and thereafter, in accordance with Standing Order 54, the Committee of the whole Senate to consider the bills that were read a second time. Honorable members, I will now take the chair as the chairman of the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee, and then as the chairperson of the Committee of the whole Senate. Honorable members, I now call to order the Constitution and Foreign Affairs
the ratification by Belize of the agreement between the government of Belize and the government of Hungary on the mutual visa exemption for holders of diplomatic, service, and official passports, motion 2021, and has agreed that it be returned back to the Senate for adoption. I therefore move that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is now therefore be it resolved that the Senate authorizes the government of Belize to ratify the agreement between the government of Belize and the government of Hungary on a mutual visa exemption for holders of diplomatic, service, and official passports. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Companies Act, Chapter 250 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to remove the fee for certifying documents as in compliance with the Act, to allow for certain fees to be prescribed by order published in the Gazette, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, with your permission, I rise to report that the Committee of the Whole Senate has considered the Companies Amendment Bill 2021, the Stamp Duties Amendment Bill 2021, the Tax Administration and Procedure Amendment Bill 2021, the Electronic Transfer of Funds Crimes Bill 2021, Electronic Transactions Bill 2021, the Electronic Evidence Bill 2021, the Public Sector Data Sharing Bill 2021, Immigration Amendment Bill 2021, Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill 2021, and the Court of Appeal Amendment Number 3 Bill 2021, and have passed it without amendment. It has also met, and the Stamp Duties Amendment Bill Number 2 has been corrected, and the Data Protection Bill 2021 has been amended. I now move, Madam President, that these bills be read a third time.
Honorable members, the question is that the Companies Amendment Bill 2021, the Stamp Duties Amendment Bill 2021, the Stamp Duties Amendment Number 2 Bill 2021 with corrections, the Tax Administration and Procedure Amendment Bill 2021, the Electronic Transfer of Funds Crime Bill 2021, the Electronic Transactions Bill 2021, the Electronic Evidence Bill 2021, the Data Protection Bill 2021 with amendments, the Public Sector Data Sharing Bill 2021, Immigration and Amendment Bill 2021, the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill 2021, and the Court of Appeal Amendment Number 3 Bill 2021 be read a third time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Titles of the bills for Stamp Duties Amendment Bill 2021, Stamp Duties Amendment Number 2 Bill 2021, Tax Administration and Procedure Amendment Bill 2021, Electronic Transfer of Funds Crimes Bill 2021, Electronic Transactions Bill 2021, Electronic Evidence Bill 2021, Data Protection Bill 2021, Public Sector Data Sharing Bill 2021, Immigration Amendment Bill 2021, Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Amendment Bill 2021, and Court of Appeal Amendment Number 3 Bill 2021, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto for the above-mentioned bills.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn.
I recognize Senator Darrell Bradley.
Thank you, Madam President. I had asked Madam President for an opportunity to speak very briefly and very quickly in relation to the issue of the shooting of Jesse Escobar. I think that at certain times in our country, we face moments of great trouble, which give us an opportunity to reflect on serious questions as to the direction of our country. And I had the opportunity as a private citizen to observe the video of that shooting. And I am mindful of the fact that this comes very shortly after the shooting of Ladi Gillett. I'm also mindful of the fact that in the United States of America, they have serious difficulties and troubles between citizens groups and law enforcement agencies, the police and other agencies. And one of the things that I would impress upon the Senate and upon all bodies of government in this country is that we need to get ahead of these issues. I've heard from the social partners, senators, that they have called in past for a constitutional assembly to deal with certain areas of constitutional reform. I also am involved in efforts in relation to UNCAC discussions. And one of the things that we oftentimes omit to talk about when we deal with constitutional reform and when we look at anti-corruption legislation is to talk about the principle of the rule of law and the extent to which all officers of government discharge their powers under the oversight of citizens' agencies. I don't want this to be too broad. But one of the things that I will impress upon this body is that I think there should be national dialogue as it relates to the relationship between law enforcement and the individual citizen. I am deeply concerned about the level of trust that members of the public may have as a result of these two incidents in law enforcement. And one of the questions that was raised in an earlier debate is this notion of balance. We need in this country to have respect for the important work of all law enforcement agencies, both the BDF and both our police and all our armed services. Those are men and women who protect us. And they should be supported, including that they should be respected. And the law of this land should prevail, and there should be calm in those areas. I do also believe that part of the discussion has to be the appropriate use of force, and there has to be a national dialogue, and I would support any effort on the government's part to lay out an agenda for citizens' understanding in relation to the appropriateness of the use of force. I have deliberately sought to not make any comment on the individual shootings themselves because I know those would be matters of investigation. I got a field report in relation to charges levied against the persons involved in the shooting of Mr. Escobar. But I think that as leaders in this country, we need to be ahead of these discussions and to ensure that the public has confidence in those who defend us, because they use force and they have to use force. And we must talk about specific ways in relation to even the question of the appropriateness of the military being in community patrolling and circumstances when a person is really trained to use deadly force to defend our borders. To what extent is that person properly trained and equipped to deal with a citizen engagement matter, even involved with a citizen who may be insulting, abusive, who may be just some is not cooperating. So that I'm not saying necessarily, because I know that the police has done a tremendous job in relation to training and mediation and so forth. I'm saying that it needs to go a little bit further, that there needs to be a national dialogue about this. And the public needs to understand the concrete steps that are made by our law enforcement agencies to ensure that there is proper selection of persons in our armed forces. There is proper training of those personnel to deal with things including de-escalating a situation of conflict, and that where persons are involved in allegations of excessive use of force, there is swift actions on behalf of those in authority. One of the things that somebody had posted to me in relation to this recent incident is that things of excessive use of force occur all the time. The benefit in this particular case, though sad it is that it was videotaped. And we need to recognize as leaders in this country that many people in our society face a reality of powerlessness. So we who live in nice homes, we are confident with the police, but there are those people who bear the opposite end of that. And I'm mindful of mandatory orders. I'm mindful of persons who are detained for extended periods of time. And what I'm saying is that we need to have public dialogue on these questions so that we preserve the principle of the rule of law in this country. And so that every citizen in this country will have confidence in the law enforcement agencies that when they use the force that is given to them and authorized by our Constitution, it is always appropriate and in the public good. I must say that I was troubled, deeply troubled, by the video. I would personally offer my condolences to the family, but I think that there needs to be a greater effort on the part of those in authority to engage with citizens about this important question of the use of force. This is 2 incidents in a very short period of time. And in other countries, including the United States, there is no dialogue on this, meaning that if you talk about questions like this, the other side doesn't even listen. And we do not want a situation in this country where citizens do not respect the police. That is something that is inimical to public safety and to the principle of the rule of law. We want people to have confidence and trust in our law enforcement officers, but there needs to be reciprocity. I have had the benefit of knowing a lot of police officers, and I know a lot of BDF persons, and I know the sacrifices that they do. But when instances of this happen, we need to pause, and we need to dialogue about it, and we need to have an understanding of why it happens, and a clear agenda to ensure that instances like this do not happen again. For the important reason that we need all citizens to have confidence in the discharge of any authority, including force, in this country. Madam President, thank you for the opportunity.
I recognize Senator Colette Montejo.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I want to also join you in your initial comments of the outset in wishing all our Belizeans, both at home and abroad, safe and happy September celebrations. But Madam President, I also want to use this opportunity to acknowledge the passing of our solid Belizean patriot, the father of our CEO in the Ministry of Human Development, Mr. Carlos Santos, child of Belmopan. We know Carlos for many, many things. His dedication to agriculture, especially to the small farmers, the poor farmers, los campesinos, or los pobres. We also know him as one dedicated to education, committed. He was always about building this country. He's been with us from the days of the Right Honorable George Price. They've stood shoulder to shoulder in the work in the construction of Belmopan and in so many things, but he's also a child of Zomorano, and I was asked by his family to please mention that in particular because He loved education. So we want to extend, I want to, on behalf of all of us in here, I would hope, extend sincerest condolences to CEO Santos and the entire Santos family. Belize has lost another patriot, and may he rest in peace. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Honorable members, the question is that the Senate do now adjourn. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate now stands adjourned.